Okay, so welcome to the last panel of today's conference entitled My Insights, Black and White, Narrative Arts and the Health Professions, Student Perspectives. So we have 4 speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in the order that they will speak. So we've got Arooba Almas, currently a first-year medical resident at the Eastern Connecticut Health Network Family Medicine Residency. A proud 2018 graduate of the University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine. Arooba is dedicated to pursuing family medicine as her profession and hopes to practice in a manner that facilitates healing and wellness. Having lived in the Middle East, New Jersey, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., and Maine, she hopes to serve a multicultural community in her future practice. Her interests in medicine include women's health, osteopathic manipulative medicine, narrative medicine, and integrative medicine. And she tells us that she enjoys reading British literature and poetry, that's great, learning new languages, spending time with her family, cooking, and practicing yoga. All great creative activities. After that, we'll have Meghan Morash, a recent graduate of the University of New England's School of Social Work, finishing with her Master's in Social Work and a certificate in Applied Arts and Social Justice. With a background in theatre, it has been Meghan's mission to combine theatre with social justice and create change. And as she tells us in her bio, theatre has been used for hundreds of years to tell the stories of people who may not have a voice otherwise. In using theatre for therapy, you get the chance to step back just enough to be able to look at the situation from a different light. Meghan plans to continue this work as she begins her professional career working with art of awareness. Good luck with that. And Maeve Morse, after that, Maeve graduated from Bowdoin College in 2018 with a major in neuroscience and a minor in art history. Throughout her time at Bowdoin, she was interested in how these seemingly disparate academic areas intersected. This led to a fascination with visual representations of patient narratives, a topic she explored through the work of Martha Hall in her senior year. She's currently an associate consultant at Trinity Partners in Waltham, Maine, with plans to attend medical school in the future. And last but not least, we have Thomas Rooney. Tom completed an undergraduate degree in English, really pleased to hear that, at the University of New England. I have to express my own biases here. University of New England in 2016. While there, he was the first participant in the Humanities in Medicine program, so a true pioneer, completing a senior research project on pediatric illness narratives before matriculating into the College of Osteopathic Medicine in the fall of 2016. Currently, he's doing his clerkship rotations at the Southern New Hampshire Medical Center in Nashua, New Hampshire. Tom hopes to complete a residency in emergency medicine after graduating in 2020. And when not on his clerkships, he enjoys spending time with his wife and newborn child, congratulations on that, as well as hiking with their dog Atlas. So please join me in welcoming our speakers for this last panel.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay? Yeah? All right. So my name is Arooba. I am as we discussed already, I graduated from the class of 2018, just this past May. I just want to say thank you for inviting me here. This day has been like overwhelming in an amazing, amazing way, and I didn't realize how much I needed it. I'm 4 months into my residency. It's a lot tougher than I expected, but also, I'm super grateful. So thank you, Amy, Kathleen, Stella, and I really, and Jennifer as well, for setting this whole thing up and inviting us here. So I'm here to talk about AKISIS, Narrative Medicine Initiative. So what is narrative medicine? We've heard, throughout the day. And can I just say, I'm very anxious in terms of public speaking. I wanted to say that, throughout as the day has gone by, I felt more and more comfortable. So I thank you for that as well. So in terms of narrative medicine, I first came into contact. I didn't know anything about it. We I heard about it through my complementary alternative medicine master's program. There was a whole class on it, and we talked about narrative medicine written by Rita Sharon. And in terms of like the definition, it's the art of gathering, creating, and sharing stories of illness and healing. She is a general internist, founder of the program at Columbia University, and she basically also offers a summer workshop that a bunch of UNE students went to, UNE medical students, after our first year of medical school. So the other 5 founders couldn't be here, but they were Juliet Baltanato, Nicole, John, Natasha, and Nehal. They could not be here today, but they sent good vibes and well wishes. So in terms of what we did, it was a week-long workshop, and we were exposed to all different forms of art, writing. They gave us like a little red book, and they were like, you have the entire rest of the week to fill this, to write whatever you want. You don't have to share it. You can if you want to. So low pressure. They took us to the cloisters. Told us to go explore New York. And for someone who's like very into words, I, for the first time, appreciated, the buildings, the structure, the architecture, art. It was also free pass days at different museums. So we went to the Guggenheim, my first time, Guggenheim, the Met, and all these different experiences. We collected all of them. We came back to UNE and decided to do something in terms of providing an outlet for students, as well as faculty and other staff. We realized that there were initiatives in place through the medical school that were basically like a weekly sort of reflection, which were helpful, but we didn't. Most of the medical class we felt didn't understand or didn't realize the value of why we were reflecting or writing. So we decided to at least, start an initiative that explained what narrative medicine was and provide like an outlet and benefit to the community. So we decided to found a chesis, which I will explain. It's basically a Greek word which means healing or cure. We had 6 student editors, which were the original founders, 3 faculty advisors, including Dr. Emery Marosa, Bethany Kenyon, who was invaluable as well, and Jen Van Dusen as well, to help found this online web space where we could, share both just writing, nonfiction, poetry, any form of art, illustrations. We even had a video, a dance performance video done by a medical student. And we started off in the fall of 2015 with What Is Your Beginning? And then following that, we had different, we basically explained what narrative medicine was on different occasions so that the community could understand why we were doing this. So there was an OMS Day of Wellness, which happens nationwide now, across all osteopathic schools, and we gave people prompts. And the picture, I apologize, is blurry. So basically write or draw about a place that you have left, the things you carry, a story of your name, your scars. And it was surprising to see how quickly, I remember two really powerful stories that came out that our classmates shared with us. One was a story about a traumatic death of a family member, and it was as if she was waiting for us to ask for that story. It was ready and right there, and I felt like she was just waiting for a safe space to share it. And the other story was about a student who had served in the military and was struggling with the dichotomy of taking life versus saving life. I was very surprised he was openly shared that with everyone. And so we tried to carry that as we went on. However, we started this during our second year of medical school, and as in life, there are transitions everywhere. So here at UNE, we basically do our first 2 years on campus, and then our third and fourth years are done all over New England for our medical rotations. So we had to come up with a way for the project to be sustainable and beneficial to the UNE community. In terms of sustainability, I checked yesterday, 85 works published, 1,000 downloaded in the last year, almost 4,000 downloaded total. So each new class, has this interest, elects its members, and there's this unbroken chain of this unbroken chain that just continues. It sort of mimics the continuity of care of a patient in family medicine or any other primary care specialty. And then the other thing we really wanted was that for it to be beneficial to the UNE community. It was open to all. I don't know how many other different professions have contributed, but we recently there was a really tragic death of a medical student, and I didn't know her because I was part of the graduating class, but the entire UNE community had heard about it, and I was so surprised to see that this previous last issue there was a piece done by an author, Alina Chima, titled Deanne. So if you guys have time, please check it out. It just, me not knowing her, and reading that piece, I was able to connect despite not ever meeting Deanne or, not, and also it basically turns something tragic into something positive that we can, grow from. So I was glad to see, and I'm hoping that it continues to be of benefit to the UNE community. In terms of the journey, so med school, is one thing. We have boards, there are exams, all this stuff, which can be very, very taxing emotionally. So there's definitely a need for that at the medical school level. Additionally, in residency, I'm 4 years into my residency, and it's not 4 years, I wish, but 4 months into my residency, and it is. I believe narrative medicine is priceless in this setting. I'm going to be honest, it's a little bit more difficult these days, but we have. If you take the time to do it, it is definitely, it helps both you and the patient. So just 2 quick stories. In terms of self-care, there was a day at the end of one of my rotations, and this was when I was in med school, and all the other med students were gone, and in my head I was complaining about, that I was the only med student left. It was so unfair. I still had to go see a patient. The resident just, wouldn't let me go home. So anyway, I went in to see the patient, and, she basically, she was an MS patient, a multiple sclerosis, and I just asked, instead of focusing on the negative, I just chose to take a step back. I asked her, what's your story? She was in her 60s. She had been living with the disease for quite a while, since her 20s. And I went home that day. I cried, but it was instead of the crying at the unfairness of, having to stay late, I was crying because I was truly happy that I was able to make a difference in and that she was able to teach me about her disease. So that really helped me personally. And then in terms of patient care, it also definitely helps. There was in the NICU, there was a patient, and there were these how nurses or other healthcare professionals, PAs, everyone was on the alert for this basically couple, young parents, first child. The mom was okay. The father, was class termed the crazy parent who you have to watch out for. And then this PA came in, physician assistant. She came in one day on her shift and listened to everyone sign out about this, more about the dad rather than the patient. And she listened to the sign out, and then she basically went in, observed the dad, And, you know, when the dad had stepped out, she just asked, you know, the mom, had the courage to ask the mom, you know, does he have PTSD? Does he have any sort of trauma? And and he did. And that was the reason why he was so overprotective of, you know, had so many questions about his baby's health. So, you know, it was just that like listening and observing that any healthcare professional or any person can cultivate that skill. So it's definitely a need, I would say. And it's not limited just to medical students or physicians or anyone in the healthcare field, although it's definitely, I would say, a must for anyone in the healthcare field. Also, one of the other things I wanted to mention was that technology, you know, human beings like bearing witness is this concept that Dr. Sharon also talks about. Human beings do like bear witness. Technology, like with the rise of, you know, Instagram, computers, social media, technology, I mean, you might differ in your opinion in terms of your opinion about this, but technology, I think, records. It doesn't bear witness. Like that human-to-human interaction is facilitated through technology, but at the end of the day, it's still that human-to-human interaction that's important. And then the reason why, you know, I'm sure everyone's heard about all these statistics in terms of burnout. Are medical students more burned out than the rest of the population? In terms of, you know, emotional exhaustion or screening positive for depression or anxiety. These are problems that carry, you know, throughout the rest of your life. So if we can do something to prevent both burnout and the risk of like physician suicide down the line, you know, I definitely think self-care, reflection, sharing can be cultivated and lead to basically the concept of co-construction, which is medicine, I think, done well instead of right. And then the journey will continue, you know, and there's a saying, publish or perish, I guess. I would say witness, publish, and flourish. So that's where I'm going to end up. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to do something a little different today. So my name is Meghan Morash. I'm an LMSWCC, which means I'm a social worker. I think that makes me a little bit different than a lot of the people in the room. I recently graduated from UNE, and I just wanted to thank Lori Power, who's here today. She heads up the Applied Arts and Social Justice certificate at UNE and recommended me to come and speak today. And she's been my #1 cheerleader through everything that I wanted to do at UNE, combining theater with social justice. So before I do any real talking today, I would invite you all to stand up with me if that's comfortable in your body today. Nobody panic. I'm not gonna make you dance or anything. So maybe we can all just, can I close this? Or is that gonna? Thank you. Okay, so maybe we all just stretch a little bit. We can raise our arms up over our heads and kind of move our body a little bit. I know there's been a lot of sitting today. Maybe taking in a deep breath through your nose and then exhaling through your mouth. Okay. If it's comfortable to remain standing, I invite you to do so. If not, and it's more comfortable, please feel free to sit. But maybe turning to somebody near you, maybe working in partners or groups of 3, and I invite you to have a little bit of a dialogue with that person. What I would like you to do is take about a minute, and I'll kind of time it and let you know when to switch, and in 3 or 4 sentences, share with that person a moment in your life that you really enjoyed, that was just really good for you, right? But really like 3 to 4 sentences. We're not going full-blown monologue here, okay? And as you're speaking and as you tell your story, so there's one person talking and the other person's listening. And I would love if that listener, if you could think of one word that you would describe the other person's story, almost like what the one-word title might be, yeah? And then also the person who's speaking, think of what the one word would be for your own story as well. Does that make sense? Yes? Verbal yes would be great. Yeah, thanks, guys. Okay, so go ahead, turn to somebody near you, and get to know somebody a little bit. Thank you for taking that leap and talking to strangers, something we don't often like to do, right? So I'm just going to take one more minute and have each of you, the person who spoke, I want you to talk second on this one. So the person who listened, right, to somebody's story, I want you to tell the person who spoke the word that you came up with for their story. Yeah? And great, you already did it. You're ahead of the game. You're nailing it. So you guys can just get to know each other, maybe ask favorite color, what you had for breakfast yesterday. Those are great questions. And share both the title that you gave to somebody else's story as well as the word that you would have chosen for your own story. So take just a couple seconds to do that and share with your partners. You can hear me clap twice. Thank you so much. You're more than welcome to remain standing, but if it's comfortable in your body right now to sit, you're more than welcome to do that as well. I thank you all for participating in my little game. I didn't want to go too big theater gamey on people. I didn't know what the space was going to be like, and people tend to freak out when I say, we're going to do theater now. So something a little less intense, I thought, is always helpful. So the reason that I had you guys do that, right, is to think about the word that you thought up for your own story and what you thought up for somebody else's as well. And think about what it was like to hear somebody else put a name to your story. Was it different or the same as what you decided it was, right? Was it close or totally different? What was it like to hear somebody else's perception of the story that you told in your own words, and then somebody else might have changed it a little bit, right? And did they tell your story in a way that was different or in a way that you felt comfortable with? So I asked you to do this activity and to think about these questions because so often our marginalized clients do not get the chance to speak the truth to their stories, and instead other people decide what their story should be for them. My project, which was Body and Sold, is a theater and community initiative to raise awareness about the epidemic of commercial sexual exploitation of our young people and to develop strategies to combat it. I brought the play to UNE this spring when UNE did their annual social work event in the spring, and the theme this year was creative arts in social work practice. And as soon as I heard that, I jumped at the opportunity and emailed Lori right away and said that I had a project and I really wanted to present it. And did she think that UNE would let me? And the answer was, heck yes, let's try to figure that out. So I really appreciated that. And they did. So I had done the play the previous fall, so about a year ago now, at an event called The Elephant in the Room, which is a play series about talking about difficult topics. One of them was sex trafficking, others were the opioid crisis, mental health in general, homelessness. So talking about the topics that we generally see as taboo. And I thought that Body and Sold was the perfect opportunity to bring to UNE to show how you can use theater and use it as a tool for social justice when we want to tell the stories of our clients. Theater has been used for hundreds of years to tell the stories of people who may not have a voice otherwise, and that's what we were able to do with Body and Sold. There's over 100,000 young Americans run away from home every year, and within 48 hours of being on the street, they are usually approached, usually by a man who offers friendship, maybe food, shelter, a place to feel safe. And most of the time, he'll turn out to be a pimp, and the young person will end up being used for commercial sex. I know this is something we don't like to think about as in our own community, but in the time that I did this project and brought Body and Soul to UNE, we wrote a grant, we brought the play. In those few months, one of my co-grant writers and project people, Abigail Maycock, she was working at a high school in Portland, and 2 students disappeared in those few months in what they think were cases of sex trafficking. So it's happening here in our backyard. And Body and Sold was created by playwright and activist Deborah Fortson. She went around the country to various support groups for sex trafficking and created a safe space for people to tell their stories. The staged reading that we presented this spring was a verbatim account, which means that word for word, it was exactly what came out of the survivors' mouths. Nothing was made up, nothing was tweaked for artistic effect. It was an exact account of the sex trafficking survivors. And that means that the words that we were speaking were their truth. It was the truth that these clients, we call them clients in social work, patients, I think for most people, their truth, what exactly came out of their mouths and what exactly happened in their lives without having it be tweaked or decided how to tell the story by somebody else. And there's definitely a lot of trauma and a lot of pain, but also a lot of resilience. And by using theater for social justice, we get to have the chance to stand up and tell the stories of survivors of sexual trauma and sex trafficking in their actual voice. So remember what it was like to have somebody else decide what your story was about, right? If it was the same, great, you get to be in that small percentage of the population who actually has their story told, which tends to go along with privilege, right? And if it was completely different, you get to feel a small piece of what it's like for people in marginalized communities, survivors of sex trafficking, to feel like when somebody else decides what their story is about. And we often see it as kind of commercialized, right? We get Taken with Liam Neeson, like we get a Hollywood movie, or it's romanticized, Pretty Woman, right? when we do this and when we perform Body and Soul in various communities, we're talking about the topic of sex trafficking survivors, and we're challenging the taboo. And we're saying it's okay to talk about this. And using theater for social justice allows us to take a little bit of a step back, so it's just a little bit easier to process. We're not so in it. And that's the beauty of using theater for therapy, is that you get the chance to step back and look at the situation from a different light. Maybe you get to play a different character. Maybe you get to change the way your story ended, the way you maybe wanted it to. And so my work with Body and Soul is the perfect example of the combination of using theater of the oppressed, of a population who may not get to speak, and using it as an art form for education and advocacy and social change. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna reopen this. And wreak havoc, apparently.
Oh, sorry, I moved everything all around.
That's okay. Yep. Here we go. Okay, yeah, I've got them on my phone too. I'm not texting, my notes are on my phone. That would really be some multitasking that I'm not capable of. Hi, I'm Maeve. I'm a 2018 graduate of Bowdoin College. I think as Stella mentioned before, I was a neuroscience major and I was an art history minor. At the beginning of my senior year, I was really struggling with the question, do I want to be a doctor? And so many people were asking me that question, so much so that I started avoiding my pre-med advisor, which if you've ever been to Bowdoin, it's really small and that's really hard to do. Like, we're talking about some serious maneuvers in the library. And so I was really struggling with this question, and even more so than do I want to be a doctor, but articulating why I wanted to be a doctor, because it's just something that I wanted to do since I was about 7 or 8. That's the only thing my parents ever remember me saying that I wanted to do. So I was in one of the classes that Kat and Marika talked about earlier. I was in Art and Catastrophe, Visual Representations of Trauma. It was my senior seminar in art history. And one day we walked into Special Collections and Martha Hall's books were on the table. And I was definitely one of those students who immediately saw them and immediately had a very visceral reaction to them. I held them in my hands and I realized that these were going to change the direction of my academic career. And so I spent the rest of my senior year working with these books and working with her personal papers, which I feel were a really big part of my development in terms of like coming to terms with what Martha Hall meant for me. And the collection at Bowdoin is incredibly rich. And at the time it wasn't cataloged, so it was me sitting in Special Collections with these boxes and boxes of just papers that were all in Martha's own handwriting, her sticky notes, her thoughts, her book proposals, unfinished things. It was really amazing. So my project began as an exploration of how Hall's books fit into the broader scheme of art related to trauma. What I quickly found out, and what is emphasized in this quote here from an article called On the Subject of Trauma by Jill Bennett, was that the art community at large tends to devalue art that explicitly references trauma, basically thinking that art that is specific to the experiences of an individual is not applicable to the broader community at large. Bennett goes on to argue in this same article that trauma art is best understood as transactive rather than communicative. It touches us but does not necessarily communicate the secret of personal experience. However, as I was looking at the work of Martha Hall, who does explicitly reference her personal trauma and experiences, I found this definition to be incredibly troublingly limited, and that's what kind of dragged me into the world of Martha Hall and made me so interested. I think as several people have touched on, I think this image has been shown before. Artist books have the unique capacity to be both transactive and communicative, as they can reference the individual trauma in two different ways. The first being through the use of the narrative, which is kind of the direct reference of the individual trauma, and then indirectly through the book as an object. Hall takes advantage of this dichotomy by using unconventional binding techniques in order to force the reader to interact with the book, not only as the book, but as an object. In this particular case, this book is called Jane with Wings, and it's one of my favorites. It was started the day after Hall's a close friend of hers passed away from breast cancer. And speaking of paper, the paper actually contains some hairs and is made. And the book is both fragile and feminine with handmade paper and soft edges. But at the same time, the binding of the book infuses it with this very vibrant sense of life, so much so that this rock is on top of the box that it sits in, holding it in. And so once unfolded, the book explodes and leaps up at the viewer, and you sort of unfold Jane and her story as you go through the book. And I think in a lot of ways, the form of this book is equivalent to the traditional trauma narratives that are built around illness. The patient is a victim, they're fragile, they're weak, they're placed into a box where they are told through a two-dimensional narrative, and they don't really get the chance to become a person. And Hall is managing with this unconventional binding and these kind of more interesting techniques to turn that patient into 3 dimensions, to allow them to be both ill and vibrant at the same time. One of the ways that Hall kind of achieves this dichotomy is using this traditional art historical canon language of abstract associations with the bodily. If you've ever been in an art history class, you've heard those terms. This is the cover of Holding and Holding On, which is a catalog of Hall's work. And you can see here how she's abstracting the image of a scarred breast using the language of bookmaking. You can see how there's the darker pink flesh underneath the threading of the binding of the book, which is reminiscent of stitches, kind of sewing flesh together. And the resulting image is kind of this visceral reaction in the viewer, which leaves you both intrigued and repulsed at the same time. Hall really takes advantage of the book format here. If this were an image of an actual scar, the typical viewer would most likely look away, not wanting to dwell too long on someone else's suffering. But because it is a material, you prompt a closer look, and I think this is one of the things that I found to be most intriguing about Hall's work was the ability to see a patient and to interact with a patient, but also be removed from that patient, which is not something that you typically get at any level, especially not as an undergraduate. You don't interact with patients all that often, especially at a liberal arts institution where you don't have a medical school, you don't have a nursing program. And then, of course, this is my favorite of her books. This was also the first one that I ever interacted with. She is not creating her books simply as art pieces or simply to build her own legacy. Her overarching goal, as I think some people have said multiple times, was to use these books to communicate with the medical community. And throughout her illness, particularly when she found out that her cancer was metastatic, which is when this book was made, she found the medical community at large, especially the doctors that she interacted with, to be cold and removed and to not take care in the language that they were using. The other thing is that she also found traditional illness narratives, often in books and memoirs, to be unhelpful in understanding her new reality due to the fact that they followed this more traditional illness narrative of the fight against cancer and the idea that the patient is either strong or weak, that they're a victim, and she wanted more from traditional illness narratives. So in this book, she, as people have said before, she writes down the phrases of 5 of her doctors, and each doctor's voice is written in a different font, and Hall's voice does not appear at any point within the book. And in this way, she was commenting on how the patient voice is extinguished and devalued by the medical community. And I believe that she's also trying to place the reader in the role of the doctor in this book. You can see yeah, you can see here that you can turn this book and you can hold it up to the light and you can look at her own scans. And it's unbelievable how quickly you go from this very emotional state of mind reading her narrative and reading what doctors say to her to being like, oh, this is a scan and I'm going to look at it in this one way and I'm going to hold it up to the light and I'm going to think about this person as a clinical object. And even as, I mean, I've looked at this book, I don't know, 70 times, and it still happens, and it's still amazing, and it still shocks me every time I look at it. And so I think that's really, really amazing. One of the other ways that she pushed against this idea of the traditional illness narrative was through this book called What You Don't Need to Know About Breast Cancer. This is one of my favorites, and it took me a long time to appreciate this book. When I first saw it, I didn't get it, per se. But she doesn't use any of her own words. She's basically repurposing a pamphlet that she got from the American Cancer Society, I believe. And as you can see here, she's like redacted things. Our book is not crumpled, but I've seen images of books that are crumpled, and she is stapled over things. And she is very clearly revolting against this traditional narrative surrounding cancer. Like, these are not her words. These are very carefully chosen words of a narrative that she doesn't necessarily believe sums up her own personal experience. And I also really love this book because I think it's one of the few places that we see an anger. And I think a lot of times when we talk about patients, we talk about victimizing and we talk about sadness and we talk about hopes and we talk about fear, but we don't often think about the anger that comes with a critical diagnosis and the anger of a life lost. And I really appreciate that that comes out in this book. This next slide. So I've included this for two reasons. The first is to show the depth of the special collections at Bowdoin. So basically all of her personal papers are there. So many of her manuscripts have these Post-it notes on them. And so right here she says she's talking about this book called I Make Books. And it, as someone mentioned before, it was done at the end of her life when she was having trouble actually like holding things, and she was really coming to terms with the fact that she was in fact dying. And so she says, my hands are becoming increasingly clumsy because of neuropathy. Over time, I coped by making large books, the awkwardness in handling some of them mirrored by my own. This is the first book where I consciously chose to write the stronger so I won't die rather than so that I will live. It was very hard to be this direct. And I've included this because I think it's amazing how careful she is with her language, and I think that that's something that I think about every single day, especially as I talk to patients every day, and I think a lot about how my language affects their perception of what's going on, and I think it's really good that Hall takes some time to make people aware of that. Hall's ultimate goal in her work was to create a better illness narrative, one that showed kind of like the true ups and downs of critical illness and demonstrated to patients and doctors alike that sometimes a focus on the personal instead of the clinical can heal more than any medical treatment. This is best displayed in the book Legacy, where Hall uses the words of one doctor who she feels practices in the way that all doctors should. You can see here that Dr. Mills encouraged Hall to reclaim her life, to not let illness be the things she left behind. The point is further driven home here by the presence of the dancing skeleton, which in art history, the skeleton is typically like a dance of the macabre, like it means death, and here she's made it very vibrant, and she's repurposing this kind of like illness narrative that she has going on here by making them dance, and she's starting to celebrate her own life. And then finally, what makes this work so special to me is the profound impacts that it had on my perspective as a future medical student. And then also, one of the things that I think about her every day, and I have for quite some time, and I spent a lot of time going through her notes and her personal letters, and especially not even as a future medical practitioner, but currently I am a biotech consultant, so I specialize in immuno-oncology and helping small biotech companies getting those drugs to market. And so I think it's very easy to get lost in that and to forget about the fact that there are patients at the end of that, and that's what we spend all day trying to do. And I think about her several times a day when I'm working, and trying to make sure that that's what I have in the back of my mind every time we make a decision. So yeah, that's the end.
All right. So I know I am all that stands between you undergrads and dinner. So I will try to make this as painless as possible. But I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity while I have you held captive to plug the Humanities and Medicine program that we have here at UNE. I was the first one to go through it. We've had 3 or 4 others since then. If you have an interest in something that isn't maybe geared towards medicine, UNE provides you a way to pursue that during undergrad, and then also to take some prereqs, and there's an interview process. But it really takes the pressure of, am I falling behind my peers if I don't major in biochem, out of the process, so you can focus on something you're passionate about and still be prepared for medical school here at UNE, which is a fantastic medical school. So, give it a thought. If it's something that you're interested in, you can always email me at trooney@UNE. I still have my UNE email address. And what I'm going to present today is actually a little part of my capstone project that I did to finish off my, my program. And the wonderful Dr. Jennifer Tuttle is in the back. She was my advisor, and I couldn't have done this without her, so I need to say thank you to her. All right. So illness narratives, or pathographies, provide a bridge between the clinical sympathy of Western medicine and the narrative empathy of the medical humanities. Such narratives require reader participation on many levels, with one ultimate goal being a more nuanced, compassionate, and effective clinical practice. Pathographies take place not only in the time and space of illness itself, but also within a larger social context, meaning existing social biases influence how and by whom the narratives are received. Unfortunately, as is often the case when discussing the texts of different social actors, not all voices are equally heard, meaning there's a large swath of society that is not being considered in studies of narrative self-reflection. These underserved voices include those not only of women and minorities, but also children whose stature as narrators and ability to communicate their experience can be constrained by their physical development. Children may not always have the ability to voice their concerns in a manner consistent with accepted medical practices, i.e. speaking or writing. And therefore, when considering illness narratives, it is necessary to begin to classify children as an underserved group. If more of an effort were made to hear these pediatric voices, clinical practices could potentially be tailored to provide more effective clinical care. Traditionally, medicine, narrative and otherwise, has a concrete set of actors, that is to say that each participant has a predefined role to play in the medical drama. Clinicians have conventionally been dominant listeners, sorting through the verbal patient narrative and medical data to parse out elements of the account that are useful for diagnosis, while patients have been more of the subservient talkers, offering up information they think may be relevant, and then following the directions that they're given. Narrative medicine is an approach to education and practice that seeks to make medical treatment more holistic, sensitizing caregivers and students to the complex stories that surround illness in order to better understand the patient and their own roles as caregivers. Illness narratives are the physical record or act of sharing an encounter with illness by any of the participants in that illness, including friends and family members of the ill, as well as any member of the care team. In other words, narrative medicine is the physical practice of using illness narratives in order to enhance and enrich treatment. Narrative medicine is a sense, the verb, while illness narratives are the noun. Although narrative medicine is an innovative approach to healthcare that makes medical treatment more effective and equitable, I don't think it has yet achieved its full potential. I argue that thus far, the voices of children have been silenced due to limitations in the current definition of illness narratives, which privilege well-educated adult narrators. This has the potential to reduce the efficacy of pediatric narrative medicine. It is necessary to broaden the definition of what an illness narrative is and how they are constructed and deconstructed in order to allow for a more holistic and, I would argue, more effective pediatric practice. Today, I will analyze a pediatric illness narrative published by Tricia Paul in order to demonstrate how children are able to use alternative techniques such as illustrations to communicate valuable insights into pediatric illness. By interacting meaningfully with children's texts, I hope to establish that pediatric pathographies are legitimate and useful. Tricia Paul, in her collection, compiles a wide array of illness accounts from pediatric cancer patients of all ages. Each pathography is different, with some using words and others only illustrations. However, most combine both prose and illustration, perhaps highlighting that children sometimes lack adequate command of the language to fully express themselves. And so they turn to illustrations, a much more universal form of communication. One particular pathography by Celeste demonstrates her desire to convey voicelessness, injustice, and loss of identity through the use of pencil drawings. Throughout Celeste's narrative, her illustrations show a clear and consistent depiction of voicelessness and frustration and the frustrations this causes her. Upon the first self-portrait, a text bubble comes in from out of frame, the speaker unidentified, but presumably an adult, stating, "You have cancer." At the same time, there's a thought bubble coming from Celeste exclaiming, "Why?" Pediatric voicelessness is deftly captured in this moment as the out-of-frame adult has a voice and Celeste does not. She is internalizing her questions rather than voicing them. A practitioner of narrative medicine could look at this picture and understand that his or her patient may be reluctant to ask questions and understand that they need to be much more explicit with their communication as a result. The next picture in the pathography is similar to the last, black and white with only thought bubbles protruding from Celeste. Still, she does not have an externalized voice. Everything is internalized. And again, she asks why, devoting 2 of her 5 thought bubbles to this one question. In fact, the same pattern of self-portraiture accompanied by a thought bubble or non-vocalized text repeats itself in 5 of her 7 portraits. The illustration on page 43 is the first one in which Celeste vocalizes her feelings, only to lament the loss of her hair. Still black and white, and now bald, Celeste yells, again asking why. Clearly traumatic, the diagnosis has caused a lot of inner turmoil. But Celeste chooses to only vocalize the thing which makes her stand out amongst her peers, her lack of hair. A close reading of Celeste's illness narrative reveals what she and presumably other pediatric cancer patients care about but don't know how to voice, their desire for answers and their lack of control over their situation. Even if the clinician can't give her those answers, acknowledging that the questions exist and validating those questions may be of some comfort to her and future patients. Celeste presents strong representations of loneliness and injustice throughout her illustrations. Her repeated use of the question why highlights her feelings that she has been dealt an unfair hand, as she asks herself why 6 times in the brief narrative. What have I done to deserve this, Celeste asks, before lamenting how she has become a burden on her family and how the cancer has made her nauseous. In each picture, just as in every other, she is alone. Only now the sentiments are not presented as thought bubbles or spoken word, but are written along the top of the picture as if they're just statements of fact. Perhaps these thoughts don't need to be vocalized to any one person because they don't come from within her, but rather are universal truths that should be apparent to all who encounter Celeste. Still, the fact that there is never anyone present to whom these thoughts could be vocalized is significant. Not only does this highlight her voicelessness, but also her loneliness, as she constantly illustrates only herself. Why does Celeste choose to present only herself in every frame? Surely she had friends and family visiting. We know she had caregivers there, as they sometimes relay information from outside the frame. But what does this say about Celeste's encounter with illness? Does she feel entirely alone and isolated, or does she only see herself and how the cancer is affecting her? Either answer could be correct. This is the kind of open-ended discussion that elite adult-authored narratives present, but that might be too easily overlooked in pediatric pathography. Celeste raises these questions through pictures with an intelligence and grace that demand pediatric pathographies be validated and taken seriously. Celeste's use of self-portraits highlights her gradual loss of identity as each picture appears to offer a mirror into her psyche at the time, showing her physical and mental journey as her sense of self changes from that of a happy and healthy 17-year-old girl to a sick and frustrated cancer patient. Within her narrative, there are only 2 illustrations that are not self-portraits. The first is a colorful picture of the word cancer, where the colors are bright and cancer is written in these large, bubbly letters. On the next page, the color fades away with only the date written in color and a picture of Celeste crying underneath, drawn in black and white. When cancer is changed from an abstract concept and related directly to Celeste, the color fades. Later, Celeste takes an entire page to write out her list of medications and what they are meant to do. Her use for an entire page for nothing but text, not once but twice, tells the reader how much cancer has taken over her sense of identity. In essence, Celeste has faded away and become cancer. Her identity has been challenged, and her sense of self seems to be in question. Gradually, throughout the narrative, cancer becomes more and more a part of Celeste's identity, until the last picture shows Celeste smiling with a full head of hair, proclaiming once again, as a statement of fact, "I have learned to accept the fact that I have cancer, and I want to get through this therapy." Celeste has provided the reader with a neat and tidy conclusion to the narrative arc. The reader can walk away satisfied now, knowing she is okay. But is the last picture consistent with the rest of the narrative? Up until this point, each picture has shown Celeste getting sicker and sicker, losing more and more of her identity to cancer, until the most important thing about her is her consumption of medications. How then in one frame does Celeste transform into a happy and healthy girl? Perhaps this picture is more telling about the pediatric tendency to act in a manner they think will make everyone else happy than an indication of how Celeste actually feels. It is possible that Celeste is very resilient, but through a close and careful reading of the pathography, the critic and caregiver alike can glean information that was not overtly presented. In addition to sophisticated rhetoric presented in Celeste's narrative, her pathography also highlights that unequal power dynamic between the doctor-reader and the patient-narrator, and demands that the relationship be taken into account when decoding her work. In addition to the fact that Celeste is a minor, the slight spelling error in the above quotation would no doubt dissuade literary critics who seek out established authors from taking her seriously. Close reading of her story illuminates why that would be a grave error. Celeste's narrative is a prime example of how a genuine pediatric narrative can be analyzed for a level of rhetorical sophistication not typically associated with children's self-expression. Celeste is able to deftly illustrate her loss of identity, her voicelessness, and her sense of injustice and loneliness through a short series of pencil drawings. Implicit within each one of these drawings is Celeste's journey through a heavily codified culture which is not her own. Celeste is trying to traverse not only the culture and power dynamics of clinical medicine, but also the culture and power discrepancy that exists between adult and child. The efficacy of narrative medicine relies on strong, clear interpretations of illness narratives. If clinicians aren't encouraged to change their definition of what is and what is not an illness narrative, and who is capable of creating such accounts of illness, then their practice is diminished in a meaningful and substantive way. Similarly, if critics and scholars of illness narratives don't develop tools for critiquing and analyzing these pediatric pathographies, the field will remain incomplete. In order to more adequately address pediatric pathographies, it is important to establish a nuanced method of critique. While many of the same close reading methods that apply to elite illness narratives will still apply to pediatric ones, readers may need to work harder to interpret silences and look beyond written accounts and to include a variety of forms of communication more accessible to children. In order to do this, pediatric otherness must be recognized. That is to say that all pediatric patients belong to a sort of subculture that is set apart from that of their caregiver, and as such, pediatric narratives need to be treated with the same understanding and respect that any culturally competent critic or clinician would bring to their work. Children are in a very unique medical position in that they will never and can never be treated by a member of their own subculture, a child. Yet, unlike all other cultural groups, every clinician or every literary critic belonged to the pediatric culture at one time. By embracing pediatric otherness and combining it with an expanded definition of what constitutes a narrative, and expanding the way in which we use literary tools to analyze rhetoric, it is possible to address existing gaps within the field which leave pediatric accounts of illness underserved. Thank you.
That was such a brilliant panel. I'm really, really impressed by all these contributions. Great diversity, breadth, sophistication, action, everything. You know, it was really, really amazing. Are there any questions, comments from the audience? How much time do we have, Kathleen? Sorry, I don't have a watch handy. Okay, great. So there is time for questions, comments, and then for some concluding remarks. So any questions or comments from the audience? And I can move around with the microphone. Okay, but you've been doing lots of running, so you let me stretch my legs a bit.
Can I give this to Lori? Then I'll sit.
I just had a question for the last presenter. I was interested in your narrative for pediatrics, and I wondered if you have any ideas on how to capture the much younger child's voice in pediatrics. I mean, Celeste was an adolescent who could write and draw. I wonder if there's ways to capture little kids' voices in some way.
Yeah, I think Celeste was older, so she could her use of language was a little more sophisticated. But some of the tools when I did this, I wanted it to be kind of a call to action. So I think some of the tools we can develop for interpreting drawings and other forms of pediatric communication can be applied to wherever your patient is. Right, wherever they created their illness narrative, I think it's on us to be active listeners more than on them. It's not on them to convey to us what they're feeling. It's on us to figure it out. So I think that we need to develop tools for interpreting whatever level of rhetoric they're capable of.
So have you looked at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her work with children on dying?
It's been so many years. I do believe that was definitely part of my research, but I couldn't speak intelligently on it right now.
I just think she kind of, dying illness, I mean, she got them to put stuff on paper, and maybe she just structured a place where they can do it and probably treat it as research, but that's what it's kind of connecting to me.
My question is for Meghan. So the Body and Soul theater piece that you all did, obviously it was not written by your group. It was taken from the stories of these multiple sex trafficking victims. I'm wondering if there was any sort of reflection that they were able to do. Like, did any of them come to see the play, whether it be your version of the play or other editions, I guess, of this play, and like what was the response by those people who were able to see their narrative in action, and like did they get any healing or support from that?
So there, not to my knowledge, have people seen the production. I know that Deborah has taken, who is the playwright, has taken it and is really working to get it kind of like around the country. To protect anonymity and confidentiality, I don't know who any of those people are. And I think that was kind of the intention. There is a lot of fear and danger in sharing your story. A lot of people, I know when I did the play originally, a woman who spoke on our panel that we did afterwards was a survivor of sex trafficking and spoke about how she'd spent years of her life running and changing her name and changing her identity and hiding. So there's a lot of that kind of goes into it. So I know that for our production, I can't speak to if anybody was there. We did invite the playwright. She was unable to attend. Some of the people that we did have in the audience for when we put the production on were people who work with sex trafficking and who are survivors of sex trafficking in the Portland community. And we did do a big panel discussion afterwards just in our space. And there was a lot of deep insight around that feeling of getting a chance to heal a little bit by being able to see the production, and a lot of feedback from students and participants who came to see what we did about seeing it in a different light, and being able to feel like you could sit there and watch it instead of just reading it or reading numbers on a piece of paper. So that's the best answer that I have to that question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? While you're thinking, oh, yeah.
Hi, my question's for Maeve. I was just curious, since you worked with the books, over some time and in depth, if you saw in any way like how they changed, maybe in like tone over the course of her illness and treatment. Like I could imagine, I'm not really sure, but I could imagine that maybe they got angrier, maybe in like their imagery or something like that. You mentioned that she changed her rhetoric from like I make books to live versus I make books to not die. So just wondering if you could speak to that.
I think one of the biggest changes was that she became not more angry, but more confident that what she had to say meant something. And so one of my favorite things that I didn't show, but that Bowdoin has, is she has a proposal for a book that was never completed. And it was called Sea Changes, and it was meant to be done with her daughters. And it was meant to be kind of a capstone of how they had handled this time in their life. And I think she had really come to a place where she had come to accept what had happened to her, and she had struggled with the anger and she had struggled with the fear. And so part of this book was going to be, this is how our family changed and this is how we adapted to it. And I think that's really beautiful. And she, in a way that she wasn't at the beginning, when she was even afraid to talk about what was happening to her, she just became more confident that she had a voice. And I think that's what was really amazing, that a patient was advocating for herself in a way that she hadn't felt comfortable 10 years earlier at the beginning of her journey.
Thanks.
This question is for any of the panel. I'm wondering if any of you guys have seen how the use of narratives and the arts can be utilized by, in an interprofessional way, by the larger healthcare team. By pharmacists, by PTs, OTs. We have so many of those majors here at UNE, and I'm just wondering if you've seen how it can be used across all the different health professions.
Hi. So I know I mentioned briefly that for Body and Soul that we wrote a grant to get funding to bring it to UNE in Portland, and one of the other people was a social worker, and then we had somebody who was in PT and somebody who was in OT as part of the team. And part of what we did as the completion of the project is we wrote a white paper and distributed it, and the perspectives from the PT and OT departments in using arts in a way to kind of work with clients and work with patients and in a social justice kind of place. I know they spoke a lot about broadening education and being able to actually, at least for sex trafficking, being able to talk about what it was and know what the different protocols were. That was a big thing. And then a big tenet that also appeared was that the ability to have a conversation about something that's uncomfortable, and something that we might not have a huge scope of practice with, but like how do we create space to at least be able to have the conversation, were big things that I know PT and OT took away. And I think that kind of goes across the board. Like, how can we provide a platform for people to feel comfortable with sharing their stories? And one way that we were able to do that was by using a theatrical narrative.
Anybody else?
Oh, I was just going to say that in undergrad, my neuroscience advisor, was really interested in Martha Hall and interested in the idea that she's a molecular neuroscientist and she teaches the diseases of molecular neuroscience, and that's one of her classes. And she was telling me how she has struggled for so many years to kind of bring humanity into the classroom. You know, you have students giving presentations every day and writing papers about MS and Huntington's and Parkinson's and getting really deep at a molecular level and struggling to get them to come back up and recognize that these are patients and that most likely they're talking to a group of people and they're presenting to a group of people who knows someone with that disease and who has like a very personal, emotional investment in it. And so she was very interested in the books as a way of kind of bringing that to the classroom.
I just had an additional thought about your question. Rita Sharon, who several people have mentioned, who wrote the book Narrative Medicine, has a chapter on the parallel chart. And essentially, she takes her residents, and every patient has their medical chart, but she allows the residents to do what's called a parallel chart, where they explore the things they're not allowed to explore in the medical chart. So this patient reminds me of my grandfather who died last year, or this patient is making me so angry because she keeps going back to using drugs and making the same mistakes over and over again. And then those groups of students are allowed to meet once a month or so and discuss what's in their parallel charts and read an entry from a parallel chart. And that's one, like, you know, kind of easy way to get people together to talk about what's going on with narrative in any discipline, I think, in the healthcare field.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I was just going to speak on that a little more. There's a huge push in healthcare right now for interprofessional and for teamwork when you're taking care of a patient. You know, there's a whole team of people involved. We're trying to move away from that old hierarchy of you know, doctor at top and then you work your way down. Now everybody's working with a singular goal. It's patient-centered. So to your question about how can we use narrative medicine in the different medical fields, I think anybody that interacts with a patient can use narrative medicine because we all need to understand that we're there for them. Right? I mean, yeah, we're all getting paid and we're all doing a job, but we got into this for the patient. And so even the pharmacist, you know, who's frustrated with a patient who doesn't show up to refill their meds, like they need to understand that there's backstories and there's a reason that all this is happening. So I think anybody can use narrative medicine.
Hi, this question is for Arooba. I currently work in COM, and I've had some medical students say how it's important to find like a creative outlet because medical school is so challenging, and they're using, you know, the right side of their brain so much. I think if I have that right, but so I know like all the great things of narrative medicine and learning empathy and all those things. I wonder if you could just sort of tell me what your thoughts are on the importance of the creative expression and outlets for medical students.
So, I mean, obviously different people, you know, have different ways of dealing with stress, dealing with, you know, the I don't want to say the burdens of med school, but, you know, the challenges. So, like, I can speak for myself, you know, writing was always an outlet for me. Way back, like, when I was a teenager, you know, didn't realize it then, you know, that narrative medicine was what I was doing. Not medicine, but, like, narrative was what I was doing. But, you know, art is definitely, I think, one of those creative outlets. Anything, I think, that you can create, whether it be dance, music. I know music is definitely also one of those ways that people can, you know, both express themselves and, like, for example, there's a resident in our program currently who creates music, you know, does DJing and, you know, likes to mix things. I don't really understand too much about it, but, you know, it's his way of exploring and dealing with that sort of, with the stresses of, like, residency. And I think also one of the other things I think we haven't talked about much, but I think is super important is also exercise. It's like the inner doctor coming out, but it's UNE does a great job, and I'm sure other medical schools as well, of offering a bunch of different classes, all the way from like yoga to CX Works, or like, I don't know, a bunch of other ones that are super intense. So it's definitely whatever works for the students, whatever they find something that they can stick with and incorporate into their life and carry it as they go forward. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
It's just, I'm thinking of that form that you fill in when you go to the doctor and you write, and they give you like, a half an inch to write a sentence. If there were some way that the patient information could be ingested, even for children, where the child could be asked, or had the space and the time to be asked, can you draw a picture of how you feel, or an adult patient to be asked to write a paragraph about how this illness makes you feel. It could become part of the normal intake of information instead of the half-inch line for the whole sentence.
Something that you just said sparked something for me, and then to kind of build on what Arooba was saying about creative expression, and just kind of, I think in general, we say pictures for kids and then written word for adults, but the ability to have a creative expression practice for everybody and not have any sort of parameters or barriers on it can be so incredibly important. And I think part of it at like a very basic level is we do get to use that other part of our brains that we don't, most of the day. I think in general, as an education system, we kind of, when we're kids, we get to use our whole body, and then as we get older, we progressively kind of educate just from, the waist up and then the neck up, and then by the time we're sitting in a college classroom, we might just be using that one part of our brain. So activating the other side is incredibly important to have like a full brain experience. And also it gives us the opportunity, even as adults, to be like, draw this picture, tell me how you feel about that in this way. And it's kind of amazing what can come out in, like you were saying, in colors and pictures and the different ways that you can analyze what somebody has drawn. It opens up a different perspective to share where you're at.
Follow that up. That's another reason why I think artist books can kind of be important, because they allow us to stay playful even when we are adults. And I think many times in conferences people ask me, have you thought of using artist books with children? Because surely when you think about the tradition of books, you immediately think of children's books, and then there is a lineage going to the artist book, and yes, it's an accepted art form, and we tend to think of it alongside adult kind of creativity. But there is this kind of line and there is that kind of connection there, and we tend to forget that. And as you say, we are moving away from illustration to word, but actually artist books combine, as we've said, so many of these very creative and playful ways of expressing yourself, and that's what I love about them.
So I have a question. Working in EMS, we only typically see a patient on the ambulance or fire engine or whatever for about 1 hour tops. Is there any suggestion as to work in this narrative medicine approach in such a short time that we get to be with this person?
So I wouldn't know how to work it in with that particular patient, but narrative medicine is a practice that in order to work, has to expand outside of just the time you're at work. You need to spend time with it with patients you don't have, just learning how to be a more empathetic caregiver. So even if you might not have, I'm reminded of a story from Rita Sharon in that narrative medicine book. One of the residents was really frustrated because she had a patient who was refusing treatment. And she didn't understand it, right? She'd done all the work, she knew all the information, she knew all the tests to run and the labs to order, and she diagnosed it and she got it. She knew what to do to fix it, and the person said no, but she still had to be their doctor. So she went and did a parallel chart, and she gave them a backstory because she needed to understand, in order to be a good doctor herself, she needed to know what would make someone refuse treatment and how do I treat that person. So she gave her, she made it up. It was kind of preposterous if I remember it correctly. But once she got there, she could be her doctor and the doctor of other patients like her, and be a better doctor. So I think if you spend time in narrative medicine, while you might not be able to apply it to that particular patient, their particular backstory, you may understand patients like them and how to be a more empathetic person in EMS.
Just a quick comment. I wanted to let you know that when we did our workshop for resilience and well-being at Ben Gurion University Medical School in Israel, the EMT squads were invited to come with the students, nursing, medicine, EMTs, and other professions. So it's an interprofessional narrative medicine community, and the data is very compelling that it works. So this might be something for you to take on.
Thank you. I might just take this opportunity to say, to sort of have a pause just for a minute. First of all, to formally to thank the four of you for being the most amazing panel, and each and every one of you is terrific. So can we pause just for a minute to give them a round of applause? Thank you so much. And we can keep talking about this, but I thought maybe I would take that little lull and say we can weave in, we have a few more minutes here, so if you think of more questions for the students, ask them. But if anyone who's been here for a while today has any further commentary, questions, anything that's come up for you throughout the day, anything about the symposium more generally that you wanted to say, I just wanted to open up for that as well. I mean, maybe you're fried and you're done, but I just wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for us to. Yes?
This day has been amazing. I had to go out and nap during some portion of it. I'm a retired social worker, LCSW, 5 years, and I'm writing books for kids, art books. I'm going to the art book tomorrow. I do that. What I've learned in the last 5 years since I retired that let me let go of the DSM, a little bit of shamanic stuff, yeah, I'm doing that too, but also the ACE questionnaire. And it's an adverse childhood experiences questionnaire. And I've written a couple books. And in the second book, I have a copy of that questionnaire. And I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but I think you ought to be, because it's something that everybody in your classes should read and know and share get their own ACE score and talk with each other. That opens up hearts of people right and left that I work with when I present it. So I'm just saying to anybody who hears, who's in any sort of school setting, get that questionnaire out, and it's wonderful, because the resilience is amazing. And see the movie Resilience, because what it says is people who have had high ACE scores need mostly a friend.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, Stella, you and I were going to sort of wrap things up here. Is there anything else that you wanted to say by way of conclusion? Have you said your piece?
I think I have just wanted to thank everyone for being here and for making this such a memorable, wonderful day. Thank you very much for your comments, your contributions, just your presence. Obviously, the speakers, all of the speakers. It's just great for me to visit again the University of New England. It's been really wonderful working with Jennifer, Kathleen, and Amy, and of course with Kaz and Marike from Bowdoin as well. So yeah, it's been a very enriching experience for me, this whole collaboration, and I look forward to more and more of that. So yeah, really, really grateful for everyone's very generous support and help, including with my crisis this morning.
Yeah.
I had this eye thing, so the title of the conference was very resonated a lot with me. But I made it in the end. Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Thank you.
And so I'll just add to that to say, on behalf of the Maine Women Writers Collection and the School of English at the University of Kent, I want to thank everyone for participating today. Part of what today was about was conversation and crossing disciplinary boundaries and opening up places for dialogue and learning about one another's perspectives. So thank you, everybody, for your attention and your time and your contributions. And again, I'm just incredibly blown away by the student panel. I feel so good. Thank you for being so terrific. So we have a little time to stretch. Many people need to go, but I did want to let you know that we have a reception and a gallery show. We'll have lovely food. I think the food should be set up by around 6, although it's probably before that. So if you want to take a stretch and then take a walk just up the little path right here, there should be some signs right up to the Jack Ketchum Library Gallery. And this is where you will see Martha Hall's books in a beautiful show that Kathleen gets the credit for designing, along with Laura Taylor, and I think Callie Gurley had some input, and who else am I forgetting? That's about it. And the show is called
My Creativity Heals Myself and Others, Martha Hall's artist books. So there are a lot of her books are there, and I'd love for people to see the show and have a little festivity afterward.
So you can see the books in the flesh, right? So thank you very much, and I think at this point we are ready to close. Thank you for coming.